Still going. And there we go. And we are live. Congratulations, everybody. You made it through the week. Good job. We really appreciate all you do. My name is Bryan Armentrout with the Food Leadership Group. And if you're new to the Food Safety Chat, we do this every Friday at 8 a.m. Mountain Time, 10 a.m. Eastern Time. And we talk about all things food safety and food production and operations and people and all these type of fun things. And one of the things, if you work in quality assurance and food safety, you know this for sure, is if you do your job well and everything goes great, nobody notices and says thank you. But we're here to tell you, thank you very much. Rod and I greatly appreciate what you do, and we enjoy eating the good food that you produce. So thank you very much. So every week at this time, I bring on an expert in food safety and defense and other activities, and we have a chat around that topic. And what you'll notice here, if you're new, is that this is not a presentation, right? We're not just, jamming information down your throat in a PowerPoint. We're doing this as a forum to help spread information and help share the knowledge. And it's a two-way street. And a lot of times, and this is always really cool, is you will note that we get a lot of conversations and things going back and forth on here as well. So this gentleman on our chat today, Rod Wheeler, is a very busy guy. And so I'm always very grateful when Rod is able to come on. So Mr. Wheeler, how you doing today?
Doing well. Coming to you live from Cleveland, Ohio.
Cleveland.
Exactly. Cleveland, Bryan, is where I was born and raised. I love it here. Most of my family is in Cleveland. And I'm actually doing some food defense training next week with the company here in Cleveland. So it worked out great. Mm-hmm. I said, I'll come over a couple of days early and kind of get started and spend some time with the family. So it's good to be here.
Nice. And if you don't know Rod, number one, you need to know Rod. And so he's very easy to find on LinkedIn. His company, and he's the founder of this, is GDFI, the Global Defense Food Institute. And Rod just does an amazing job out there. He's, I think, one of the leading authorities out there on food defense and making sure that you're keeping your product safe. So we're always glad to have him. So as Rod said, he's in Cleveland. And one of the things that we love to do here on the show is, as we start out here, let us know where you're at in the world. I'm in Loveland, Colorado, where we had our first snow here last week, Rod. And pretty much, it's definitely on its way. But as is the normal way of doing things in Colorado, is that it'll snow and then I think it's like 65, 68 degrees here this weekend. So you gotta love that life in Colorado.
Wow.
So
I was in Calgary. I was in Calgary about 2 weeks ago, and actually I posted some photos on LinkedIn where it was snowing while I was up there, and I didn't even take a jacket. So I was freezing, and I stayed in the hotel the whole time. I was up there to do food defense, of course, but you got to love Canada, because in Canada, it lets you know what season you're in.
Oh, yeah. That is for sure. So we had a little bit of a glitch here. Looks like on LinkedIn. So I think we're live now on LinkedIn. So if you're watching on LinkedIn, throw me a comment here and let me know that you can see us. That would be very helpful. So one of the things that we always do on the chat here too, which is super fun, is everybody join us for a drink of your favorite beverage. And Rod's scrambling for his drink. There we go. Cheers, everyone. Very nice. So it was really good timing on our chat here for today. Tim's here. Great. There we go. Now we're live. Thanks, Tim. Appreciate that. It looked like YouTube and Twitter were okay. Robert's here. Great. Megan's here. Okay, good. Now everybody's rolling in. Excellent. So on Halloween of all days, Rod, you put out a notice on LinkedIn that I was like, oh, holy moly, what's going on? And you had said on there, hey, everybody, keep alert. There's some things going on out there, and you need to make sure that you're on high alert out there. So what were you thinking? What kind of caught your eye on that?
Well, there's a few things that's going on right now. Obviously, as everyone is aware, the war that's going on over in Israel and in the Gaza Strip, and then the Ukraine war. So back in the end of September, Bryan, the FBI issued a private notification to an industry notification whereby they were warning companies here in the United States and around the world, large and small companies, to beef up their cybersecurity mitigation strategies. And the reason they said that, and the reason they offered that notification, as you can see there on your screen, is because we've seen a significant amount of threats increase, not only around the world, but here in the United States against particular companies of all of the critical infrastructures. And so if there was ever a time, folks, that you want to ramp up your cybersecurity, the time is now. Take it from me. I have two clients. I just mentioned I was up in Calgary. One of my clients in Calgary, one of the reasons I was up there is because it's a food company, a food processing company, but they were hit by a cyber attack. And thankfully, they did have some mitigation strategies in place to try to intercept it. But even with that, the company was shut down for 2 days. They lost 2 days worth of business. But you know what? There's some other things that we're seeing, and this is where it gets really, and I don't want to get too far ahead of ourselves here, Bryan, but this is where it gets really interesting. You may have cybersecurity built into your systems, into your servers and things like that, which is great. But you know what? There's other ways now that we're finding that some of these hackers can still get into your system by way of some of your vendors and some of your suppliers. If they're connected to your systems at all, you definitely want to talk to your suppliers and vendors about what kind of security measures they have in their infrastructure, because that's another backdoor way that we see that these perpetrators are actually affecting the systems.
Yeah, I mean, they're definitely getting sneaky, aren't they? I hadn't really thought about that because, we get these stupid emails. It's like, hey, you've been paid. Open this for your payment invoice. And you're like, yeah. Okay, I'm not, delete. I'm not dumb enough to do that. But to your point, Rod, we're sharing more and more information, Dropbox and Google Drive and all these information. And companies are connecting with their suppliers and saying, oh, cool, this is a great way for us to get documentation from our suppliers directly. We can just, upload our COA into this shared drive and they can download it and it's all good. But to your point, if somebody gets access to that, uh-oh.
Well, not only if they get access to that, Bryan, but one other thing too, and here's the thing that a lot of companies don't think about. If you have cameras, right? Most companies, food processing companies, any company these days, we're using a lot more CCTV, right? We have CCTV everywhere. Well, guess what? That's another way that the bad guy can gain access to your data if your CCTV system is tied into your intranet or your internet at your facility. So you may be saying, so what do you mean by that, Rod? There's a term that folks in cybersecurity use. It's called segmentation. And you want to segment your CCTV system on a T line or a separate internet line from the same line that you use your data, your company data. Because if you don't do that, folks, listen to what you can do. And I wish we had time. I could show you how to do it just from my cell phone. If I can gain access to one of your cameras, and all of our cameras have IMEI numbers. Every camera these days is connected to the internet some kind of way. Well, if that camera is connected to the internet, my cell phone is connected to the internet. If I can gain access to one of your cameras and your camera system is on the same infrastructure that your data system is on, then guess what else I have access to? I have access to your data just that fast. So you got to really be careful with that. And that's why I've said for many, many years, make sure your CCTV system and any other systems are on a separate network than your data systems.
Wow. I recently saw on the personal side, people's cameras that they're putting on their homes now. So Ring cameras and things like this at your front door. Hackers are getting into those.
If you can get into a Ring camera, I mean, and again, maybe we'll have another chat one day and I'll just go through all of these things with you. But not only can you hack into someone's Ring cameras, but a lot of times through Alexa and other devices like that, Google Home, everything in the home is connected now. There's ways, we call it war driving. I could drive through a neighborhood using my cell phone, hit certain codes on the cell phone just to see what doors will open up. Garage doors will open up. I don't mean to sound like the Grim Reaper here, but I mean, I share all of this information with you just so that you're aware and so that you can put those mechanisms in place to try not to become a victim, because we're seeing a whole lot more of this, folks. And unfortunately, it's going to get worse, especially during the holiday season. This is the right time of the year, the best time of the year to conduct a vulnerability assessment, not only of your infrastructure or your network, but even your physical security at your facility. Conduct a vulnerability assessment so that you can identify where your vulnerabilities are and try to mitigate those risks.
Right. And wow, I mean, this is one of those areas, Rod, where when you start digging into it, it's just like, okay, I've got a big gap in my knowledge here. Like you, right? So, I obviously, right, I work out of my house and these type of things. And I upgraded my internet recently, and I actually hired an IT guy to come in and help me set up stuff and firewalls and just information like this, right? So just kind of taking all this little bits of information that we're giving you here today and say, okay, I'll do one thing here this week, and I'll do one thing next week, and then over time you'll get everything figured out. Don't let this overwhelm you, I guess, is my message. One of the things that's really cool now on home networks that you have is you can set up separate systems and separate, to your point, Rod, firewalls. So you can now set up guest internet access, and then you can limit. So if you've got people coming over, to your point, for Thanksgiving, and all the kids want access to the internet, you can set up a separate guest network with limited firewall. So all they can do is access the internet, and that's it, right? They can't deposit anything into your system that may be malicious.
Exactly. And most home servers can do that these days. But again, going back to the industry and going back to the processing facilities, a lot of times our formulas, our recipes are connected to our data system some kind of way. One other thing too that's very important, make sure your data systems are redundant. Make sure that you have backups after backups after backups. But here's the kicker, folks. This is some good information. Your backups should not be on the same server that your original information is on, that your original data is on. That should be separate. You know what a lot of companies, what I'm advising a lot of my clients to do is make a backup monthly of your systems. Keep it on a jump drive or a separate hard drive, a physical hard drive. Remember the old ones? Keep it on a separate hard drive away from the data center, because again, if it's connected to the network, then it's possibly somebody can hack into it.
Wow. Yeah. And we often forget, right? What we're doing here right now in this virtual space is this is probably 60% of our job now, right? Is going in and managing data and doing things through computers. So imagine what will happen to your world relative to food manufacturing and food safety if you don't have access to that data. And it happens, right? I worked for a company in my past that went through a ransomware incident worldwide, and it was terrible. And for people who don't know, I guess we can kind of start with that, Rob. What is ransomware, right? We hear this term all the time. What does that mean?
Sure. Well, what ransomware is when somebody has the ability to gain access to your data through your servers or your network, and then I like to say, they can lock everything down. They put a code into your system, or a virus, you can call it a virus, into your system, whereby you can't make any changes to your system at all. Everything is literally locked down. And the bad guy has the key. And so what ransomware is, the bad guy will send you an email, other ways to communicate, and they will say, send me $10 million by way of Bitcoin to some offshore bank account, and I'll send you the key to unlock your systems. That's the way it works. It's really that simple. Now, what you can do in the meantime is try to rebuild your systems. But see, the problem comes in, Bryan, is when companies in 2023 allow hackers to even get into their systems. Why? Why is that such a problem? Because we've been talking about this, meaning the government, been talking about this in existence for many, many years now. So companies, look at what happened with MGM just not too long ago. You want to know how much they paid out to get the key to unlock their systems? $100 million. Wow. $100 million is what MGM paid out. That should have never happened. And if you Google the MGM cyber attack, you can read all about it. The leadership at MGM now is being looked at and scrutinized as to why they even allowed their system to be attacked like it was. There's a couple of other companies right now. Obviously, I can't mention the companies' names, but I can tell you, if you Google it, you can find out on your own. But their systems are completely locked down. And what happens is it affects the supply chain. And that's where the bad guy really have their strength, with the supply chain. Because if we can't get product in and we can't get product out, ingredients in, then our companies are just about out of business. So that's why it's so important that, you know, every company take this serious from the CEO on down.
Right. And you mentioned one of the other areas that is a potential threat. So think, for example, in your production facility, and you've got your formula for making your product, right? This is your proprietary information. This is your bread and butter. You would never leave that laying around. But if hackers are able to get into your system, it may not be as obvious as what we're talking about, where somebody is, you know, and we'll do a little thing here.
All right, send me the money.
Right? It's not that obvious. They may be going into your system and getting access behind the scenes and then just watching and just kind of stealing information, and you never even know.
Exactly. You're exactly right. You know what? That's something else that we're seeing a lot more of now too. As soon as they gain access, Bryan, meaning the bad guys, to your network and to your systems, they don't immediately send out this ransom notice to, you know, pay me X amount of dollars. They could actually, and you'll read about this if you take the time, Bryan, with that document that you just had up. It talks about it in that FBI warning. What they will do, they'll wait a while, and they'll put different types of viruses throughout your systems based on time. So maybe one virus won't even affect you for 30 days. The next virus won't affect you for 60 days. But see how they always have this sort of like a cloud over your head. They're controlling you. And that's what we're seeing a lot more of now as well. That document is really, really interesting. If your viewers get an opportunity to read it, it's actually on my website too. If you go to the Global Food Defense, myfooddefense.com, if you click on downloadable documents, I uploaded that document to the website so that everybody can read it on their own. It's really fascinating.
Yep. And I will put that link into your website right now. And while I'm doing that, Megan has a question for you, Rod. What is your recommendation for the best approach? Oh, let me put this up on the screen for everybody. It's kind of long. We'll see if it fits. There we go. What is your recommendation for the best approach for doing a comprehensive vulnerability assessment that includes all the important players and programs for food manufacturers? Wow, great question.
That is a great question, Megan. And, you know, vulnerability assessments, we've been doing them for ages now, right? And I've been doing vulnerability assessments since maybe 2005, believe it or not. Right after 9/11, I've been doing them. And we've come a long way with vulnerability assessments. But let me see how I want to put this. When you do your vulnerability assessment, try to look at your facility. You want to do a physical vulnerability assessment, first of all, right? You want to look at where are those areas in your facility where if you were the bad guy, you can gain access to the product and maybe put some deadly contaminant over into the product. But you also want to do your vulnerability assessment under the cover of darkness. As you know very well, Bryan, a lot of times when I'll start a vulnerability assessment at 3 a.m. 3 a.m. And I've been doing it for years. And people used to always say, why do you start at 3 a.m.? Because that's when the bad guy is going to come out. So, Megan, I guess what I'm trying to say is if you think from the perspective of the bad guy and you include all of these things in your vulnerability assessment, right? And then what you do is you come up with what you've identified. You sit down with your food defense team and maybe an expert like myself or somebody else in the food defense world and get some recommendations. There's things you can do right now, and it won't cost a lot of money either. There's things you can do right now to ramp up your security, Megan. I would say 50% without spending a whole lot of money. Just ordinary things that you can do. Let me give you real quick one example, Bryan. One of the things I've told companies for years is the visitors log, right? A lot of times companies he's smiling, folks, because he knows exactly where I'm going with this story, because it's been happening for years. But there's something new happening with visitors logs. Now, if you have that old paper visitor log where people sign in, throw it away as soon as this webinar is over. I'm telling you, throw that paper log away. You know what someone recently did? A guy went to a facility, took pictures of the visitors logs from previous dates, had the names of the companies on these logs, right? And the individuals' names. You know what this guy did? He called a couple of companies and represented himself as calling from the company that had the visitor log out front. And he said that a check, some kind of a payment, did not go through, and he needed to get another form of payment. One company, I'll never mention the company's name, spent paid $200,000 to this guy before he was caught. Just
Wow.
because he had access to that visitor log data. Folks, that is a liability. I'm telling you, get rid of that visitor's log. If you are going to use the old paper log, which I don't recommend that you do, I think you should use a software, because software has come way down. But if you do use the old paper log, only have one sheet out per day. Don't have that whole book out like we used to. That thing is really antiquated. You shouldn't use it. But that's an excellent question, Megan.
Yeah, everybody's got one of these with them all the time, right? You got a camera right there.
Absolutely.
I actually was at a plant and we were dealing with FDA, and FDA was going through the visitor log. FDA wanted to see who had been to the plant. So yeah, get rid of the paper logs. My goodness.
Yeah, those paper logs are outdated. You really shouldn't be using those. Like I said, the software have come way down, the price of software for visitor management. So you can get a pretty good visitor management program per facility for under $2,000. I mean, it's really not that expensive. So really look into that. I highly recommend that. You know, one other thing too, Bryan, while we're talking about cybersecurity, back in May of 2021, some of your viewers may remember Colonial Pipeline, the hacking incident that took place with Colonial Pipeline along the East Coast, whereby Colonial is a fuel company, right? They deliver a lot of the fuel up Interstate 95. This is interesting, folks. Check this out, right? So they were hit with a hacking attack, right? Somebody infiltrated their systems and shut down the supply chain. Some of you all may remember this. It was all over the national news, right? So for about a week or two, prices on fuel went up along the East Coast. Why? Because there was a snag in the supply chain. Right after that happened, this was in May of 21. Right after that happened, in June, I wrote an article. I had an article published for the food industry. And I said, this needs to be a wake-up call, because if you think about it, our food is processed and shipped, and our supply chain operates very similar as that Colonial Pipeline fuel chain. And lo and behold, some of you all remember JBS Meats. In August of that year, they were hit with the same kind of an incident. JBS Meats paid out over $4 million. There were warning signs, Bryan, not just to JBS. Everything that I'm talking about now is a warning sign for the food industry, for any industry, but especially since we're talking food and food safety. These are warning signs, folks. But you know what people always say, Bryan, to me, and you hear it all the time. We never thought this would happen to us. You hear it all the time. Turn on the news, you'll hear it tonight. Something major is going to happen. The first thing people say is, we never thought this would happen to us. Folks, it's going to happen. It has happened. But the good news is there are things you can do to mitigate that risk.
And as we were preparing for this conversation here today, and so part of what's going through my mind, and hopefully people are picking up on this, like with Duncan's comments here relative to supply chain as well, is the parallels between what is being done in food safety and what we're talking about here today. It's the same thing. It's the same thing, right? So we're talking about supply chain. And generally, if you're thinking about this from a food safety standpoint, you're thinking, oh, my incoming ingredients and my packaging and these type of things. But to your point, Rod, your plant isn't running without electricity, without natural gas, without water. So if you're getting water from the local municipality, it may be worth a conversation with your IT group to talk with your local suppliers of these commodities to say, okay, what steps have you guys taken to make sure that you're not going to get hacked? There have been issues where water systems, there was an issue, it was a near miss in Florida, where a water system got hacked by a hacker, and they were going to change that system and they were going to overdose it with chlorine, and they caught it in time, right? So what are you doing to make sure that those companies that supply you are secure?
Well, you know, that's one of the questions on my vulnerability assessment when I do assessments, Bryan. Exactly what you just said. How, you know, where do you get water from, for example? Is it the local municipality? Is it a water well? I've actually gone out when I was out in California in Oxnard doing some assessments to the water supplier for the county out there, Ventura County, as a matter of fact. I went out there, I met with those folks. Why? Because a lot of the farmers, this is interesting, folks, a lot of the farmers use water for what? Irrigation. if I'm the bad guy, listen to this. If I'm the bad guy and I can get to that water supply, look at the damage I could do to those farmers out there. And when I went out there and I started meeting with these folks, they and this was about 2 years ago, but I've been doing it regularly, but they were looking like, you know what? We never thought about this before. And I'm thinking to myself, come on, you're the government. You should be thinking about these things, right? But this was Ventura County. But I will say that they were very cooperative, and there's a lot of things that's in play now. We haven't talked about drones. We'll save that for the next conversation. But that's something else that's huge right now that we need to be concerned about, especially and I'll tell you why I thought about it, because I'm talking about farmland. And we're seeing suspicious activity, we believe, in the form of drones fly across a lot of our farmlands. Now, why is that all of a sudden? See, I think that's something else. That's another risk that we need to be looking at. I know the government's already looking at that, but drones, folks, could be huge as well, because now you can purchase drones and use these drones to gain access on company property, take video from above, and you would never know it. There's things you can do, though, to mitigate that as well.
Mm-hmm. Well,
that's
just
why
look
this
at the
chat needs to be a 4-hour chat, Bryan.
Wow. I hadn't even thought about that. Just even with Google Maps, the access you can get to look at a production facility, right? There have been webinars and things like this where I've demonstrated investigations, and I can zoom in on the rooftop of a plant, and you can get a lot of information just from doing that.
Absolutely. Forbes magazine did a study back in 2022, and I'm just going to read this to you real quickly. They found in their study 3 bullet points here. 88% of the businesses hit by ransomware were 10 employees or more, while 60% were bigger than 100 employees. That's interesting. 43% of IT consultants reported a customer falling victim to ransomware last year alone. 43%. And then the last bullet point here, 72% of employees were locked out of their files, right, for at least 2 days, and 32% were locked out for at least 5 days last year as a result of ransomware. It can be very devastating, folks, if your company is hit with the ransomware attack. And that's why one of the bullet points that I had put on that alert that I sent out was to test the plan. I don't know if you saw that. The last bullet point was test your plan. And there are ransomware mock plans that we have, mock exercises, I should say, that you can test your plan. There's a lot of things that come into play. A lot of wheels are moving in a ransomware attack. And so if you test your plan, you can kind of identify those holes that's going to exist if, in fact, something does happen to you. I was with one of my major customers out in Torrance, California, not long ago, and we did a ransomware mock. And all of their senior execs were around the table, and the room was so quiet after I threw the scenario out that you could hear a pin drop. And everybody was like, wow. We never thought of it like that.
Right.
It really makes a difference. And so, again, these exercises are just to get us to the point whereby we can try to mitigate. Look, we won't be able to eradicate all risk, obviously, but we can mitigate that risk, and we can make the impact less impactful if something does happen to us.
Reasonably likely to occur, right? So the parallels to food safety just continue through this conversation. And yeah, if you don't test your system, you have no idea, right? And it can be as simple as, this is one that always just amazes me. So someone with malicious intent wants to get some code in your system, and you have great systems and great security with your Wi-Fi and all these type of things. All they need to do is leave a couple of these little guys on the ground outside the break room where the people go out and smoke, right? So an employee goes out, looks on the ground, and says, ooh, look at that, free USB drive. I wonder what's on that. Plugs it into his computer, off it goes.
Exactly, Bryan. And I'll tell you, I think you've been around me too long, Bryan, but you're exactly right. And that's why, again, with my vulnerability assessment that I do, one of the questions I always ask my clients is, do you allow folks from the outside, meaning salespeople, vendors, whoever, when they come in to your facilities, do you allow them to place a USB drive anywhere in your network or in any of your internal computers? If the answer is yes, then you will probably be a victim of ransomware or hacking at some point. You should
Right.
never allow that to happen, folks. If someone needs to gain access to your company data for whatever reason, and you want to give them access, you give them a clean USB drive. They may say, oh, this USB drive is good. Don't worry about it. No, you give them a clean USB drive, because that's another way that we know that people on the inside, if they've been compromised, then you could pay a person on the inside $10,000. And look, if I'll stop an employee out in the parking lot and say, if I give you $10,000, will you just plug this into a computer, USB drive into your computer? That's all I need you to do. Take a picture of it with your phone, come back out, and I'll give you 10 grand. What do you think people will say? Sure. That's all I got to do. Yep, that's all you got to do. Just plug this into your USB. So, if somebody on the inside is compromised, they can be one of your greatest threats.
And I wanted to circle back to your comment earlier, Rod, relative to company size, because that's very interesting. So a lot of times in the food industry, especially with consultants like you and I and things like this, we deal with companies that are on the smaller side because they don't necessarily have the internal resources to have a full-time person to do what they need to do. And so they will hire outside expertise. So they will hire an IT company to manage some basic things for them and stuff like that. Okay, great. You're saving some money. You're getting some basics done. But generally, those IT companies are just doing the basics, right? They're coming in and they're helping people set up their laptops and these type of things. They're not doing, in-depth management of risk assessments and things of this nature. And they're not being paid for that. And companies, to your point earlier, never happened to me before. They're not thinking about it. So criminals aren't stupid. So they're taking different approaches here. It's like, oh, okay, I'll go after that big pot of gold with that big company, but the chances of me getting a score are pretty small. So maybe I'll take the approach instead of hitting a whole bunch of small companies and getting little payouts and then out ahead in the long term. So if you think you're a small company and you don't have a risk with this, you're sorely mistaken.
You are. I mean, unfortunately, it could actually lead to your business not being in existence any longer,
Yeah.
depending upon the severity of the attack, of the cyber attack. I mean, I've seen it. I've seen some companies say it's just too much for us to pay out. We're just going to go out of business.
Wow.
And you're exactly right, Brian. I mean, it could happen to any company, any size. I had a company reach out to me maybe about 6 months ago. They were going to hire a new IT person at their facility, but they were a little nervous because they could not find much about this guy's background. And one of the things I've preached, you've heard me preach this, is that people working in certain positions at food facilities or any facility need to have certain types of background checks conducted. There's certain things that you need to check that your normal background check won't pick up. And we can save that for another chat as well. That'll really have your head spinning. We're not doing background checks the proper way. But anyway, they had me do a background check on this guy, and he was okay. He was totally legitimate. But they did the right thing, because this guy was going to be in a position whereby he could have really caused a lot of harm to this company if he knew what he was doing, if he came in with ill intent. So again, that's doing your due diligence. And I think every company should do that, folks. So if you're going to hire somebody or have somebody come in and they're going to have access to your networks and your servers and things, make sure you check out their background, because you want to make sure they are, first of all, who they say they are, and that they don't have any dirty laundry, if you will, in their bag that they're bringing into your facility. Oh, and the same goes for temporary workers. Real quick, temporary workers and contractors. I can't stress it enough. You've heard me preach this for years. If we have any vulnerabilities in a food facility, those are your two vulnerabilities. Why? I'm not saying contractors are bad, not saying temporary workers are bad. What I am saying is we don't know all of them. We don't know them personally. And a lot of times when a contractor comes into a facility, they have their gang boxes, their toolkits. What's in those toolkits? Are there USB drives? Are they affiliated? I ask this question when I do my vulnerability assessments. Are your contractors affiliated with Hamas or ISIS or the Caliphate? And everybody looks at me and laugh. And I say, I'm serious. And you know what they say? They say, well, we don't know. All right. And so you're going to give this person direct access to your systems? And they say, well, what else can we do? Check that person out first before you give them that kind of access. So the same with temporary workers as well. Make sure they don't have direct access to your systems, because that's who can really hurt you.
Right. And to your point earlier, and we've talked about this before, 3 a.m. in the morning, Rod shows up at the security gate. Hey, who are you? Oh, yeah, I'm with the temp agency. Oh, okay. Yeah. All right. Well, yeah. Come on in. Right. Bam. You're in the door.
Happens all the time. Unfortunately, it happens all the time.
Yeah.
I don't want to make light of it, and it's not for fun or anything like that, or it's not to get anyone in trouble. The whole purpose of those penetration tests, Brian, is just to show companies how vulnerable they are. Look, thank God it's me that's showing you this, and not the Sarnea brothers, aka Boston Bombers. Let's thank God it's not them showing you this, because, folks, when you look at some of these attacks that's going on, these cyber attacks that's going on right now, the FBI director, Christopher Wray, gave a speech about 2 weeks ago, and I listened very attentively to that speech. This is the #1 law enforcement person in the United States, and he was very clear. He can't be any more clear than this. Matter of fact, I think I sent you the video, Brian, because I recorded the video of what he was saying. And he was saying, if there ever was a time in this country that we are vulnerable to not only cyber attacks, but any other kind of attack, the time is now, because of what's going on, the instability around the world. And so, knowing that, he's not saying that to frighten anyone. He's saying that so that we can do our diligence, do our due diligence, and be more vigilant. And that's what we have to be. And that's why I said in that other bullet point that I put out with that alert is make sure you follow your visitor protocols to the T. Make sure you check the identification of everybody wanting to gain access to your facility, so that if something does happen, you call me, you call the investigators, we come out, you can tell us exactly who that person supposedly said that they were, who they were.
Mm-hmm. Well, and to your point earlier, and we've talked about this before as well, is your greatest asset is your teams, right? So there was a story you told before where you were at a facility giving a talk and things like this, and there was a guy that you noticed in the background who was doing some weird stuff and sketching out some maps, and you went to go talk with him, and poof, he was out of there, right? It can be as simple as making sure that your employees are aware of this, and if there's somebody new in the facility, that they're aware and that they know enough to raise their hand and maybe, hey, supervisor, who's that over there, right? Awareness
is key. I mean, and that's really 50% of the battle, just awareness. Not only just from the senior management, but every employee in that facility needs to be aware. The story you were referencing very, very quickly here, Brian, I know we don't have a whole lot more time left, but I was having a meeting with some senior executives at this one company. It was in New Jersey, and we were all in a conference room, and the conference room had like a window. You could see out into the area, the office areas, right? Well, I was in this room with another colleague of mine and the senior execs, and where we were having our meeting, I kind of looked out to the office areas, and I saw a guy supposedly filling out a job application. And, when you fill out a job application, hopefully you guys can see me on the video, but when you fill out a job application, you're looking at the application. But guess what this guy was doing? He was doing like this. Well, that's not how you fill out a job application. You're supposed to be looking at the application. So I told my colleague, his name was Lance. I said, Lance, look at that guy over there. And Lance said, what is he doing? So everybody said, yeah, it looks like he's drawing a diagram of something. I said, I'll tell you what. The HR manager was in the meeting with us. I said, go out and ask to see the guy's job application. So she went out and she said, sir, can I see your application? The guy said, no, I don't want to give it to you. She said, but that's our property. So she went to grab it and it tore. And the guy took off, ran down the stairs, and got into a waiting truck on the outside and took off. Wow. That name, he has started writing a name on that application, folks, already. And the piece that tore off, this company has 16 locations in the United States. We were in New Jersey. That same name was used on an application out in California that same morning. How can that be? How can that be? Amazing. Now, the person who used that name in California, out there, you had to give a name before that they give you an application. He gave a name, but you know what? He never left the application. He never left the application. One other thing, too, while I'm thinking along the same lines, Brian, this is some good stuff. Have you ever, and I want to ask your colleagues this on the webinar here, have you ever had a temporary worker come to your facility work one day and never come back. But it doesn't stop there. They never call about that paycheck for that one day. Think about it for a minute, folks. Think about it. Most people, okay, if you work one day, even if you just work one day, I want to be paid for my one day, right?
Yeah.
You have this person that comes out, they never come back to work, and they never say anything about getting that last paycheck. But now what most of you all are thinking, well, the temporary agency pays these individuals, so you wouldn't know. So that's why you need to ask the temporary agency whether or not they issue checks to these people. Because why is that important? If some of these individuals never came back and never called, I would check those individuals out. Because you know what the question becomes, Bryan? What was the real reason they wanted access to your facility for that one day? What was the real reason? Was it really to work as a temp, or was it to take pictures of certain areas of your facility?
Yeah. And so like Duncan says here, right? Many of my hacker friends. So Duncan has hacker friends. So I'm gonna make a note of that. Have become quite adept at making themselves appear legit, wearing nice shirts, right? So that's kind of, and so again, this is paralleling food safety and food defense and all these type of activities. In food safety, right, you have these threats that are out there, but in what we're really talking about here today is we have opponents that are active, intelligent, and deliberately looking for vulnerabilities in your systems, right? Salmonella, it has a nature and you know what to expect.
Right.
These adversaries that we're talking about here today are actively trying to figure out what are the holes, how can I get in here? They're constantly poking. And if you don't take that into account, oh man, like we're talking about here today, you can have some serious problems.
Well, I think the question becomes why? Why are they poking these holes? Why are they trying to see where your weaknesses are at your facility? There's always a reason for all of these things. You know, in my food defense class, you've heard me say this, the bad guy will pick and choose his targets. Okay. They always do, whether it's a terrorist or whether it's a criminal that I know plenty about. They pick and choose their targets. Everyone won't be a victim of a crime. Only certain people will be a victim of a crime. Only certain companies will be hit by crime and terroristic attacks. Why? Because the bad guy looks for the soft target. When I start my food defense course, and I'm sure some of your viewers have been in my course, the first question I always ask companies is your facility a soft target or a hard target? And I let them answer, right? And then I let them tell me why one way or the other. And after going around the room, a lot of times people say, I'm going to change my answer from hard target to soft target because they realize, you know, these things can happen when they hear their other colleagues say, no, that can happen. This happened to us. Is your facility a hard target or soft target? If it's a soft target, now a soft target is an attractive target, right? It's where you don't have doors closing properly and somebody can gain access. It's where you don't check the identification of truck drivers that you've never seen before that wants to pick up a dedicated load of product, but only because they have the bill of lading number. Oh, let's fill up the truck and let them go. No, can't do that anymore. We used to, but not anymore because that's a huge vulnerability, folks. I hope you made note of that. Truck drivers, get a copy of their CDL, their driver's license, know who that truck driver is before they drive away with your product's name on that bag or that can. So these are the kind of things that you want to think about when it comes to deciding whether or not your facility is a hard target or a soft target.
Right. And yeah, so criminals have ill intent, but they're not stupid. And so what we're talking about with these physical risks applies exactly to our cybersecurity conversation here today as well. So you have these hackers and these people out there who are looking for those soft targets, and they may do a couple of things to see how easy it is to get in your systems. And if it's easy to get into low-level activities, then they're like, oh, okay, this is now worth it. If they have crappy systems at this level, that means they're going to have crappy systems more than likely at higher levels of security. So now it's worth my time. I've identified a soft target and I'm going to go after them. So that's a great description. I love that. And to your point earlier, Rod, the only way to figure this out is to do these security assessments and look at these type of things. And people are people, right? So if I'm in a company and I go to my IT department and say, "Hey guys, are you doing a good job?" What are they going to say? Right? Oh yeah, absolutely. Right? We're killing it here. We're awesome.
Right.
You need an independent person outside of that system to evaluate it and make sure. And I think that's where it becomes really, really valuable, Rod, in the services that you provide to help those companies get an objective evaluation of how good their systems really are.
Yeah, exactly. And because if you don't do it now, I've always said this: if you don't do it now, you're going to wind up doing it later anyway.
Yeah.
If you stay in business, because we've seen this happen over and over and over again. Look, the MGM attack, the attacks at JBS, the attacks. I have the list right here of all these companies that's had cyber attacks over the past few years. The list goes on, and it's going to only increase. Don't take my word for it. Listen to the director of the FBI. Maybe you'll take his word for it. You know what I mean? This is the reality. And the thing is, we have to get to the point, Bryan, whereby we feel comfortable talking with our colleagues in the food industry, sharing this information so that we can all stay safe together. You know, when it comes to food defense, when it comes to protecting our people and our nation, there's no competition there. Whether it's, the Global Food Defense Institute, whether it's NSF, whether it's AIB, they got experts on their team there. We all got to be together. That's the only way we can defeat that wannabe bad guy, by sharing information with each other and learning from each other.
Right. And sometimes the bad guys may think they're doing a good thing. So look at these different organizations that say, like, I don't necessarily, have an opinion relative to what people are doing for some of these things, but then they cross the line. And areas I'm thinking about are like animal welfare and groups like, PETA or things like this, where they will actively try and infiltrate companies to get information on that company and say that, oh, they're abusing animals or things like this, which may or may not even be true, because part of this, right, is that's part of their fundraising activities, is doing these type of things. So what type of vulnerabilities do you have in those areas against these type of groups?
Right. And then what countermeasures do you have? For example, no trespassing signs. Something as simple as no trespassing signs can be so beneficial for you when it comes to groups like PETA and these other groups, because now they are violating a law by gaining access onto your property. And that's why we talk about that. We talk about the practical day-to-day things that you can have in place, like no trespassing signs, like having your doors numbered, your perimeter doors numbered at your facility, like restricting access to storage areas, right? Open batches of product, restricting access by temporary workers to open batches of products and things like that. All of these things add up and doing what? Making your facility a hard target.
Yep. And yeah, Megan was commenting here on temps as well, right? So temps are a sensitive topic in food because of the worker shortages, right? Think COVID, right? Everybody was just scrambling to get people to work in some of these plants because everybody needs to eat. They also tend to bring that risk because they're given access to the site and then forgotten 100%, right? So the way I'm thinking about this, Rod, is within food safety, let's look at environmental monitoring or things like this. You have different zones, right? So zone 1, food contact, very, very sensitive, has to be clean, has to be sanitized. You got to watch that really closely. And then you move out 2, 3, 4, right? And then you get to the administrative areas and things like this. And we evaluate risk in our facilities based on that type of model for food safety. We should be doing the same thing for food security.
Right. And I'll tell you, I'm smiling because, you're preaching to the choir. And when you say those things, Bryan, you really are. I call them red zones, right?
Yeah.
And I actually suggest this to all my clients when I do vulnerability assessments. Certain areas of your facility needs to be designated as a red zone. Those red zones are critical areas that we've identified where somebody could harm your company and harm your product. If you're not a red zone level or authorized employee, you do not go into that area, and it's highly enforced. I'll tell you real quickly where I got the idea from. I got it from the airports. Every airport in the United States, when you go down the jetway and you're about to get on the plane, if you look to your right, there's a door. And that door has a huge sign on it saying, "Do not enter, only authorized personnel." If you go through that door and you don't have your badge showing, the badge has to be visible, right? This is a TSA regulation. If you don't have your badge visible, TSA will come running, and 2 or 3 times of violating that regulation, and you're banned from working around airports. They highly enforce it. It's a red zone, basically, is what it is. And so we need to do the same thing in our facilities. I have a client that just finished getting a new facility built, state-of-the-art facility in Kansas. I'm going to be out there in 2 weeks. I was actually involved with their construction side of putting together the blueprints for this facility, which I think is great. And you know why, real quickly, Bryan, is because they wanted me to give input during the construction phase as to where these red zones need to be. Great. And now they have certain areas built in their facility where open batches of product. These areas are going to be locked areas. They got beautiful signs up saying red zones do not enter. That's how it should be going forward. So they've built security into their building, literally. And it's going to save them a lot of money and a lot of headache over time.
I love your airport analogy, right? Because now you've got my wheels spinning, right? So we can learn from other activities that are putting security in place. So kind of the first thing I'm thinking of here, Rod, is what you can see and what you can't see, right? Because there are things that you have in security that they want you to see. They want you to see the police cars parked outside in front of the airport. They want you to see the guard dogs walking around inside looking for drugs. They want you to see the TSA checkpoints. And you have these different layers in that facility. And just like a production facility, that last layer, if I'm getting on a plane, and you see these videos online on YouTube of crazy airline passengers, right? The crazy drunk lady who wants to get on the plane. And that last level of security are those agents at the gate, right? So they are evaluating every person getting on that plane and saying, is this person going to be a potential threat? And then even then, the flight attendants on the flight are looking at these type of things too, to make sure that we're keeping everybody safe. So using those models and then applying that into your facility is very valuable.
Absolutely. So you look around and you share, between the different sectors, between the different infrastructures. You look at what one is doing, and maybe we can implement some of those security measures in the food industry. So those are the kind of things that we do, such as piggybacking or tailgating, folks. That's another vulnerability. That's when somebody uses their card access device to go through a door, but they allow someone to come in behind them. Even if you know that person has their own card. They need to swipe their own card. There's a good reason for that, right?
Yeah.
It's not just so that the door can open. That's not what you use the cards for. Sure, the doors will open, but you really use those cards for more than that. You use the cards for accountability. Who's in your facility? Who's not in your facility?
Right. And kind of back to the TSA example, right? Using these visual cues in your plant. So there's a multitude of different colors for hairnets, for example. So, okay, if I'm a temp worker, I've got a red hairnet on, right? Everybody in that facility knows that that's a temp worker. And to your point, if they're in an area that they shouldn't be in, that becomes really, really obvious, and they need to be then moved from that area. All those contractors, right? To your point earlier, oh my goodness, contractors, always a headache, right? Because from a food safety standpoint, we've all had these conversations where you talk with the contractors and you're like, okay, well, what are you doing here? And, oh, I'm an electrician, and okay, I'm putting these type of things. And you're asking about their tools and how they're, keeping things clean and stuff. And Rod, it always comes, eventually they'll stop me and they'll say, hey, listen, Bryan, I don't know anything about this food stuff. I'm just an electrician, right? No, right? No, you're not. You're an electrician in a food plant, right? Now you're also an electrician in here from a security standpoint. These things need to be taken into account. So do you have any training programs relative to biosecurity and food safety for your contractors, right? Before they even set foot in your plant, just like your temp agency.
Exactly. Even when it comes to food defense. I mean, just think about it. When visitors go to a food facility, they usually have to read the GMPs and they sign off on the GMPs. Here's the question for you, though. Do you have 10 bulleted things on that GMP form that relates to food defense, or no? Think about your own GMPs. If you don't, you need to add them. If you need some assistance, just reach out to us. I'd be more than happy to email you a list of things that need to be on that list so that your visitors can sign off on that as well, along with the GMP, such as, for example, no weapons being brought into the facility, no cameras being used while inside the facility. This is for visitors, contractors, temporary workers. No medication, no pills. I can give you a story where pills fell off into some product, actually was baked into a product that went out to commerce. So those kind of things need to be in your GMP list when visitors sign off on it. Make sure they read it. Make sure you even read it to them. One of my clients had me even do a video, 7-minute video that all their visitors and contractors need to watch and sign off that they've watched this video. And I went over on the video, I went over all the security measures. So little things like that can really make a difference at the end of the day. One last thing, I know we're just about out of time, Brian, but I just want to mention one last thing that I found, a vulnerability. You know, this is what I do every day. And I think some of you, this is kind of unrelated to cybersecurity, but I wanted to leave it for the end. If you ever rent a car from a car rental agency, don't leave your contract in the car. Don't leave. There's a huge vulnerability. I tested it and it works. Don't leave your contract in the car. Take your contract with you. Why? Because you know what somebody can do? And this is what I tested. I thought about this and I said, you know what? This is a vulnerability. We all rent cars all the time. Yeah. And sometimes we leave our contract in the car. If I take a picture of your contract that you've left in the car and I put your contract back, after you turn that car back in, I can call you at home a day or two later and say, I'm calling from Hertz. I'm just saying Hertz. And your credit card did not go through. You used the card 5897, the last 4 digits. That's all that's on your contract. Yeah. You know what? You're going to believe me. I'm going to say, I need another form of payment. Oh, try this card.
Mm-hmm.
I have your name, I have your address, and I have the last 4 digits of your credit card number. You're going to think I'm from Hertz. It's the world we live in, folks. It's the world. Don't leave your contract in the car.
Right. And it's funny, right? Because con man, what does the con in con man stand for? Confidence, right?
Exactly.
So you call me up with an air of authority. You have the information that I have supplied. In my brain, I'm saying, oh yeah, I did rent a car at Hertz. Yeah, okay. Right. You have now gained my trust very, very quickly. And now I'm willing to hand over everything to you.
Yeah. Because you left all your information on the contract in the car.
Absolutely. So, wow. And so as you said, Rod, we're really short here on time. So let's kind of bring this back up to the 30,000 foot level. What key lessons did you have for people as we're going through our conversation here today?
Well, the main thing here is to keep in mind that we cannot completely, like I said earlier, eradicate events, hacking events and things like that. We can reduce the risk, but we won't be able to get rid of the risk. Do a vulnerability assessment. Step 1, you have to do a real good vulnerability assessment. There's no formula, folks, that I can say, you know, use this formula and you'll be safe. No, you got to put your feet on the ground, eyes on the facility, eyes on your people, eyes on your product. Do your vulnerability assessment. Write a good plan. Include in your plan your cybersecurity. I highly, highly recommend that you do a ransomware mock exercise. Make sure your plan will work. If you need assistance with this, again, I don't like to sound like a commercial or anything. Reach out to me. If you don't have a budget for it, don't worry about it. We'll worry about it later. Why? Because I'm really committed to helping the food industry stay strong. I'm really committed to making sure that we have, you know, done our due diligence and stay vigilant so that we don't become a victim. Because let me tell you, what happens to one company is going to affect all of us.
Yep, absolutely. And then so I think everybody who's on the chat here can see these strong parallels between what we do in food safety and what we're talking about here today. And it's kind of really cool, Rod, about what we do. We get to kind of poke our nose into a lot of different stuff and ask a lot of different questions and say, what are you doing here? What are you doing here? You know, and we're one of the few groups in companies that gets to do that. So it's a great responsibility on that side as well. So take it really seriously. Do you have any courses coming up or things like that, Rod, that you'd like people know about?
Yeah, I am planning a investigation course for October. It's going to be in March in Orlando. Haven't set the exact dates yet. A company reached out to me down there, and a couple of companies, and they want the investigation course. I used to call this course Food Defense Plus and Food Defense Advanced. Now it's just an investigation course. This is a course which will teach you how to conduct your own internal investigation before you get outside law enforcement and folks like that involved. The reason this is so important is because law enforcement agencies, even the FDA, I mean, they're overworked and they're short-staffed, as we all know. They just don't have the resources. So there's things you can do on your own before you get others involved to try to see what's going on with your facility. If somebody were to sabotage your product and things like that. So that course is coming up soon. And again, we're always available to do vulnerability assessments and in-house food defense courses.
Yep, you're not going to find a better expert out there than Rod. So highly recommended that you do that.
Thank you.
With that, and I'm going to put here in the comments as well, we talked about this last week as well. So I've got the food safety chat database, and I've got these all arranged by topic now. So the information that we've got here with Rod is going to go in the database. So if you missed this conversation live, or you want to listen to it in your car while you're driving to work, to kind of catch up on some of these points, because we have gone through an absolute fire hose of information here. You can go back and listen to that and pull out those key points. And remember, all you need to do is, if you can pick out one new thing, one new activity that you can do right away, that's a winner, right? So with that, guys, we're gonna bring our chat to a close here this week. And as always, Rod, thank you very much. Just amazing. Love having you on. And thank you, everybody, for the comments. Duncan, Megan, great comments, everybody. That's why we do this. And to Rod's point, we're all in this together, and we're all sharing this risk. And so the more that we learn together on this, more that we can protect each other, because we want to make our industry a hard target, right? We want them going somewhere else. We'll figure out what we need to do, and then we'll help other people figure out theirs as well. So with that, again, you've done a great job this week. Enjoy your weekend. Have a great time. And we'll see you back here next week at the same time on Friday at 8 a.m. Mountain Time, 10 a.m. Eastern for the next food safety chat. And we'll have another awesome guest like Rod on. And in the meantime, enjoy yourself, and we'll see you back here next week. Thanks, Rod, and thanks, everybody, for joining us.
Thanks, Bryan. All right.